are going to get to the heart of public safety, and we are going to get to the root of crime, and we will make the city safe. Because as your chief, I am up for the challenge. Thank you.
You are listening to Seattle Police Chief Adrian Diaz right there, sworn in last week, finally attaining that permanent job after 29 months in the interim role. He says he's always up for a challenge. Well, plenty of them over this past weekend with a rash of shootings in the city. We'll take a look at what the SPD is doing about gun violence with a new chief on the job. We're also looking at an interim transit program to help large employers that's going permanent, and a shocking trend of deaths for homeless people in the city of Seattle. All this and more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews this week. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, all mine. And my co-host is David Croman, transportation reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, it's not that I expected the Seahawks to lose to the 49ers, but for some reason, this one didn't hurt as bad as I thought it would.
No, I wish it hadn't been such a blowout, especially because the first half was
So
close.
Mm-hmm.
I thought maybe they had a shot, but no. Even making the playoffs, I think, was kind of gravy to a lot of people. So it's pretty relaxing to go in as the massive underdog, because then if you lose, it's kind of what everyone expected anyway.
Always. Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens next year. Looks like Geno Smith is coming back. So thank you, David. As always, thanks to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast on the first floor of the Seattle City Hall. John, make sure you're keeping up the good work there. And a big thanks to our patrons, too. This year, we're asking people to join at the very simple, easy as can be, $5 a month level, and we will send you a Seattle News, Views, and Brews sticker. David, I'm going to send one of these to you, too, because it's so darn special. Feast your eyes on that right there. Full color. It's incredible. I'm working to get all these to our current patrons out there. Have some patience, please. But new patrons, why don't you join in? We'll feature a photo of your sticker in action if you send it to us on a travel mug or a folder or something along those lines. Cannot wait for that. And a special mug shot of the week this week from Pete, who sends in a shot of his mug, one of the last ones I have out there. It's with his cat, Harry, a Seattle library book there, too. Thank you very much, Pete, for the support there. Thanks also to Converge Media, too, for airing the video version of this podcast Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get rolling with right here, right now. Well, David, the Seattle Times was one of many media outlets that noted this past weekend, just days after Chief Adrian Diaz was sworn in as the chief of the Seattle Police Department, it was a weekend marked by a number of instances of gun violence. We had a drive-by shooting at 10th and Pike, 2 weekends in a row for this kind of violence near Capitol Hill, another shooting in the New Holly neighborhood, plus a rather brazen situation with 3 men entering a teriyaki restaurant on Rainier Avenue and shooting a man in the chest and killing him. I know, David, right after a swearing-in ceremony where the chief accurately pointed out that violent crime is dropping overall in the city of Seattle, we have a weekend like this, and I think the question always comes to, what else can the SPD do to stop shootings like this from happening?
Yeah, I mean, it was if it was an easy answer, I suppose they would do it. I guess it depends on whom you ask.
Yeah,
I think Chief Diaz and a lot of folks in the police department would say they need more police officers because the numbers are still down. Bruce Harrell wanted to roll out Shot Spotter again. The perennial piece of technology to kind of triangulate where gunshots occur in the city. That is and always has been quite controversial, and the Seattle City Council didn't like that.
Didn't bite on it in the budget this year for sure. Right.
Yeah. And then there's also on the kind of broader side is community engagement and outreach, and communities like Choose 180, which take a kind of more community first approach to this. But again, none of these are new things that we're talking about in relation to gun violence.
Right.
So I mean, it's great that the numbers of the amount of violent crime is going down. I suspect that has a strong correlation to how much is open, because we saw current crime go up when the pandemic struck and a lot of things shut down. And so it's good to see that as we open society back up, that seems to be sort of following that same correlation. We'll see how long that lasts and if that continues. But that's not to say, just because it's going down, not to say that you still don't get these bursts of gun violence. And I would be, I would be out over my skis if I could explain why that happens.
Yeah, it's just always so challenging because Chief Diaz, in his swearing-in speech, actually pointed out that the SPD has recovered more guns, meaning taken them off the streets since 2020 than it has in 20 years. But clearly, a lot of work to do. And I want to head back to that whole issue of these community-based groups dedicated to reducing gun violence. You talk about community passageways, Choose 180, Rainier Beach Action Coalition. I've dealt with that group before. How do they help? How can they help? They're kind of able with crime being committed. You need police to do that, but there's some other work that needs to happen within that community to try to stop this gun violence from happening in the first place. Can you talk about those community groups and what they could do, what they could add to this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what they do, because a lot of gun violence involves the victims of gun violence on one day a lot of times end up being the shooters on a different day. So a lot of what these groups do is sort of try to step in and prevent retaliations and fill people's days and connect them to jobs and opportunities and give them reason to not need to go out and feel like they need to establish some kind of dominance through violence. So it's kind of a very upstream way of getting people into different situations where violence is not something that they feel like they need to resort to.
And I guess I wanted to make sure I went into this a little bit further with you here. These different programs, I know they work. There's a lot of efforts around them that show that they do, but I just think that the investment from the city of Seattle has to continue there. I think about the different work that's going on with alternative 911 responses or whatever else. I mean, this really is one of those both and conversations. You need the police presence, you need these community groups, and you need some other ideas of how to respond to these 911 calls too.
Yeah, and that was really born out of the 2020 protests. I think that I think Community Passageways got a pretty good budget infusion in the months after that, after 2020 and those protests, and there was a lot more focus put onto these community groups. That said, I don't know that there has been the amount of progress on establishing those alternatives to 911 as many people expected or hoped, including some of the biggest advocates. I know that Councilmember Lewis has been sort of pushing for this for a while now, but we really don't have a lot up and running as far as true alternatives to 911 just yet. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but I don't know that that is out and functioning in the way that a lot of people, at least in 2020, when a lot of those protests happened, would have hoped they would be by now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that back and forth, David. I appreciate that. And I wanted to look closely aligned to the work you're doing as the transportation reporter for the Seattle Times here. There's something on the City Council Transportation Committee agenda this week, making the employer shared transit stop program into a permanent thing. So these are these Microsoft connector buses, etc. You're going to see them on the street. We've had them for a while. They've had interim approval to use Metro bus stops, shuttle bus zones since 2005. And in 2017, the city started a pilot program to study this. So now the city wants to make this permanent with annual fees charged to the employers who want to use this program. The shuttles can't use the super busy spots like rapid ride stops, etc. There are some other provisions too. And it sounds so far so good here, David, with this, but I think this comes back to a lingering reality of the COVID pandemic, fewer people coming back to work, fewer people feeling all that positive about using transit. With a plan like this, if you build it, will they come? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think they need to report out as much as, say, King County Metro does. Maybe they do, and I've just missed it. But, we can look at King County Metro and say, I think ridership is still about 50% of what it was pre-pandemic. So it's not good. I think that there have been some delays in reopening offices. So although, I know that Microsoft has brought more people back than maybe the average downtown company. So I wouldn't be surprised if it started getting more users. And I guess it's kind of interesting. You could see an argument that a program like this takes away from metro and public transit, because they're using these private systems instead. There's also probably the argument that if these people were not taking these shuttles, they would drive. So it kind of, I don't know which one you compare it to, because if you compare it to driving, then you say, well, this is a nice alternative. If you compare it to metro, then you might think it's taking away from ridership there. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would think on balance, it's probably seeing better ridership than metro, just because companies like Microsoft seem to be opening back up a little bit more than kind of the general business climate. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I don't know what the sort of broader implications are for transit in King County. I don't know if there are any. There might not be. But it's good for these employees, I suppose, who need to get across the bridge and get into Microsoft, that they have this option.
Sure, and good for drivers who want to make sure that people are using any kind of transit, I suppose, to reduce the amount of cars on the road. But just that bigger question, David, of what it's going to take to get more people comfortable with using transit. Maybe it's a smaller transit bus like this, or maybe it is a metro transit type of vehicle. The city is actually citing some surveys in its presentation today that indicate, compared to pre-COVID patterns, just a lot of people envision driving alone more and using public transit a lot less. How do you change that trend? I think that's the multi-billion-dollar question for transit agencies all across the country.
Yeah, indeed. I would be a rich man if I could give a clean, concise answer to how you do that. I think one thing we hear a lot is whether transit can function better outside of, quote, peak hours. A lot of our systems were built around the commuting hours, getting people to and from work. I think the kind of starkest example of this, which I wrote about a few weeks ago, is the Sounder train, which truly is just only functions during commuter hours and is really struggling. But it applies to really all transit, which is, it used to be the peak hours that would get those numbers up. So if people maybe aren't going back to work as much, then you start having conversations around how do you make transit more useful for people who are just trying to go out to lunch, or go to get their groceries, or go to their friend's house. What does that look like? Because, I think, but there's, to your point about people driving alone, I think for a lot of folks, maybe they got in the habit, they were working from home for a while, and then they started going into the office, maybe once a week. And they're thinking, the roads are emptier, it's easier to drive, it's quicker. The parking was easy because no one was driving. So they just maybe got in the habit of hopping in their car and going in. But then it turns out, it's kind of nice. They listen to their podcast and they have their own, they can drink their cup of coffee in peace or whatever. And, how do you get people back in the habit of taking the bus? I mean, I think there's a lot riding on transit agencies being able to answer that question.
Yeah, a ton happening there. Thanks for going down that path with me. I know I always ask you these impossible questions, David, and I appreciate you engaging them every time. All right, well, up next, there's always possibilities, true. All right, up next, a disturbing report from the Seattle Times about deaths of homeless people in our region last year, a record that King County never wanted to set. Details coming up on Now Hear This. Well, if you missed the headline from the Seattle Times over the MLK holiday weekend, I will spell it out for you. More homeless people died in King County in 2022 than ever recorded before. 310 people died while homeless in Seattle and King County, a 65% jump over 2021, and an increase of more than 100 people from the previous all-time record set in 2018. I was talking a few months ago with the CEO of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, Mark Dones, not about these numbers specifically, but this related issue of the urgency of the work the KCRHA is doing. And here's what they said.
There has to be some recognition, I think, in how we spend our money, that the idea that we're going to build our way out of this crisis over 20 years that doesn't align, again, with what it's clear that voters are asking for, or even, from my perspective, with being maximally responsive to human dignity and suffering, right? Like, this is a humanitarian crisis and we got to act like it.
Well, David, there's a lot to unpack with this statistic statistic here. The amount of fentanyl-related overdoses makes up more than half of the overall death toll. The amount of homicides going on involving homeless people doubled from 2021. What struck you about this information? A very solid report from your colleague, Anna Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, the jump in homicides is concerning, of course. That certainly stands out. That I think it was double than it was the year before. And so, we talked about gun violence. That is no exception in the homelessness community. Fentanyl, like you said, I mean, that is just kind of ravaging so many communities right now, and it seems to be getting stronger and more available. It's just such a different ballgame than the heroin of old. And you talk to any fentanyl user or people who work with people who use fentanyl, widespread understanding that if you're using fentanyl, it's kind of a question of if, not when, you will have an overdose, and no one will be there with naloxone to help you. But then there's kind of, a couple other pieces to that. I mean, one, with the pandemic, so many services shut down. There were, it used to be that there was a lot of, I don't know, maybe not enough, but there were spaces that people could go and seek services when they need it. And then a lot of those closed their doors during the pandemic. And that has shown up in a lot of really uncomfortable ways for people, a lot more people on the streets, people in a worse way than they maybe otherwise would have been because they didn't get the help they needed. But then there's another piece of this too that I think, I wrote about this years ago when I used to work for Crosscut, which is the homeless population is getting older by quite a bit. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But, one thing is you see a lot of kind of what they think of as like second half boomer generation. So not the kind of more like late 50s, maybe early 60s people were born. A lot of those folks just, got hit with a lot of different challenging times and maybe don't have the savings or
resources,
resources or pension. So a lot of those folks are becoming homeless for the first time. And being homeless is really bad on your health. And so if you look at the kind of average age of the homeless population, it increases every year. And so, medical professionals have been warning for a long time that we're going to see this wave of increasing deaths among folks for no other reason that they're getting older, and being homeless ages you by 15 or 20 years. So being a 60-year-old person living on the streets sort of in some ways like being 80. And there's just there's just very few resources for these people because nursing facilities and assisted living facilities are expensive and hard to come by. And, hospitals don't want people staying there too long, but at the same time, shelters won't take them if they've got some kind of disability. Anyway, it's a really hairy situation. And I wouldn't be surprised if part of this spike is seeing some of this kind of wave of deaths of older folks that medical professionals have been predicting would be happening. So a lot of different angles there. That's just one that I think sometimes can get overlooked.
That's a great point there. I did want to jump back on the criminal cases piece, though, because this is a really tough one. The Seattle Police Department says homicides rose across all populations in the city, with 56 criminal homicide investigations reported. Last year, homeless people made up more than 32% of those cases. Any thoughts about that and what can be done about that situation? Those cases are so difficult to work on and to bring to court, I think, for officers, just because it's difficult to identify some of the people involved, etc. Some thoughts about what's happening criminally there, because I thought that was a very alarming statistic here, too.
Yeah, that's, it's hairy to know exactly what's going on there. I mean, I think drugs and fentanyl probably play a role into that. To a certain extent, too, it was recommended by, I guess, the CDC during the pandemic not to clear out homeless encampments as much. And, there was a good logic behind that because harder to kind of contact trace and easier for viruses to spread. And so, for years, there was not a lot of intervention happening in some of these homeless encampments. And, the vast majority of people who live in these places are peaceful folks who are just kind of trying to get by. But there was also this element in some of these large entrenched homeless encampments where people come in and try and take advantage of folks. And there are, if you look at it, some crime that happens in these large encampments that
Hmm.
have kind of taken root. And so, that might have something to do with it as well. But again, I think pinpointing the exact root of
Yeah.
crime is a perilous task sometimes,
Yeah.
especially by a transportation reporter. So,
Oh yeah. No. I hear you. I just think it's interesting to see these different issues start to dovetail with each other when we talk about crime, when we talk about homelessness, public safety overall. And I think you're absolutely right. These camps, when they do spring up, I know a lot of people get upset about them for a lot of different reasons, but I think the fact of the matter is the people who are living in these camps are often preyed upon, and
right,
these
yeah.
are magnets for criminal activity for people who are looking to do some wrong and rob some people, etc. So,
Right, and a lot of the perpetrators of some of the worst crimes don't
sure,
actually live there in those
right.
encampments. They come in and because they see a vulnerable population, they see people that they think they can take advantage of, and on a lot of different fronts. So yeah, I mean it's heartbreaking for the people that live in there that
Yeah,
they become the victims of this crime more often than not
yeah,
more
yeah.
often than they are the perpetrators of that crime.
Fair. Thank you for bringing those pieces up. All right, I'm going to switch gears a little bit with you here, David, and everybody, if you are ready for some more names to start dropping in the 7 city council races that are up for a vote in November, well, start your engines. I'm already counting 9, and that's just for people who have filed with Seattle's Ethics and Elections Commission. Just before we got involved with this podcast here, Councilmember Lewis announced that he's going to run again in District 7 here, and we're going to see a lot more people jump in here. David, I was looking especially at a few challengers for Shama Sawant's seat in District 3, including a bigger name in Joy Hollingsworth, the business owner there. She's been part of her family's marijuana operation, Hollingsworth Cannabis, since 2013. I interviewed her on Seattle Channel a little while ago for some of the work that she's done on cannabis equity. She's African American, LGBTQ, and I'm wondering 2 things. Is this the candidate that can push Seattle's longest serving council member out of office? Maybe I can start there before we jump into, is Shama Sawant going to run again? What do you think about this back and forth here?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that I was going to go there first, which is
Oh, I see. Go
Councilmember
for it, man.
Sawant hasn't actually said she's running again, so that'll be the
Yeah.
first question.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the one thing that I have learned with Shama Sawant is to never write her off.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who has paid attention to Seattle politics would probably agree with that, because there have been several times, just recently last year. Was it last year or was that 2021? My years are blending together.
Yeah.
Whenever her recall campaign or the recall came up against her,
Yep.
Seemed like that was going to succeed, and then it didn't. The year before that, she ran and was down by like 9 points on election night, but made up for it in late counted votes. So, and the Seattle Chamber of Commerce has been gunning for her for years.
Yeah.
Seems like every time she's up for election, they come out with these stories saying that polling looks really bad for her, blah blah blah, and then she ends up winning. She is just, I would say, of course we all know that she is probably the most controversial member of the city council, but also just seems to be incredibly resilient. And so Joy Hollingsworth seems like she's got a great story. Certainly could make a good run at Councilmember Sawant, but I would never preemptively declare Member Sawant's political career to be done, because she has defied those every single time so far.
It's very true. And it is interesting for me to see as well that of the standing council members, now we know that Councilmember Herbold isn't running again. We know Councilmember Juarez isn't running again. We know Councilmember Peterson isn't running again. But of the remaining council members there, the 4 remaining that are in district seats, only one of them has come forward as of the recording of this podcast, with Councilmember Andrew Lewis to actually say, yes, I'm going to run again. And I think it is a little bit of a question mark. I know in talking with Councilmember Herbold about this, she mentioned the vitriol that surrounds the political scene here locally. These are council members that unfortunately get death threats every week. I know that Councilmember Herbold mentioned that to me. And so I just think it's become a little bit more of a dangerous job. I know this has happened with Councilmember Sawant as well. She's never been one to back down from a fight, but I wonder about that piece of it too, David. It's interesting to me that more of the standing council members have not come forward yet. Here we are in the middle of January to say, I'm going to run again in November.
Yeah, and I think Councilmember Peterson is indicative because he's just a first time. He's only done one term.
That's right.
He kind of reminds me of Jenny Durkin or Rob Johnson before him, who only did.
Rob Johnson didn't even finish his term. Keep going.
Yeah, he only did maybe 3 out of 4 years of his first term. So there does seem to be people kind of get in and then realize that this is a little uncomfortable and not that pleasant in a lot of ways, and then decide that they don't want to do it anymore. So, you kind of used to assume that someone would at least run for a second term,
right?
But you can't really make that assumption anymore. Councilmember Juarez, that to me is the least surprising because she said, I think, even she ran for re-election. This is her second term, and I'm fairly I don't have it written down anywhere, but I seem to remember her saying during that campaign that it would be her last, that she wouldn't run again.
No, I remember her saying that. Yes.
Yeah, so that's not surprising. So she'd been kind of but Councilmember Peterson not running again to me was genuinely surprising. And you're right, the fact that we haven't heard from Councilmember Strauss yet, we haven't heard from Councilmember Morales yet. I would be surprised if she didn't run again. She seems to be kind of settling into that role. And then I'm missing somebody, but
I was going down the list in my head too. Tick, 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 going around to 5,
I guess
going around to 4. Yeah, Sawant's the other one. There you go. Yeah. So no, there's a ton ahead there, and I think we're going to see a lot of candidates. I know a lot of them are interested in the democracy vouchers already. I've seen that on the extension's website there, but this is going to be an interesting play out over the next couple of months. And heads up, folks, I'm actually planning a special podcast to be released later on this week to patrons first about all these different names expected in the upcoming council races. So definitely stay tuned for that. All right, well, coming up, we're not always able to report the great happy ending kind of news on this podcast, but maybe this time the West Seattle Swing Bridge, the Low Bridge, has reopened, and David has the details on Transportation Talk. Well, David, we talked about the closed week, and I guess that's all it takes. Some special attention from Seattle News, Views, and Brews. The West Seattle Swing Bridge, the Low Bridge, is back up and running. A 3-week closure, and I'd like for you to talk about this. What was the fix, and what can we expect in the months ahead? It sounded like a cylinder in this bridge, the very unique construction of this bridge. This cylinder needs to be repaired, and I'm thinking that's a lot tougher than what I'd find under the hood of my car. So what's going on with this?
Yeah, it's a unique bridge for a lot of reasons. It's a swing bridge that only, does this 45-degree turn, which is, I'm no engineer, but apparently that's rare. And it does that with these 4 hydraulic cylinders. And so basically it turned out one of them was broken, and it's a really complicated fix, but crews figured out they could run this bridge on just 3 cylinders in the meantime. So they can open up to traffic, to freight and bikers. It does mean that it's going to take the bridge 10 to 15 minutes longer to do the swing, but which could cause delays because this bridge is right in over Harbor Island. So it's got a ton of marine traffic coming and going below it. Apparently it opens and closes something like 1,500 times a year, which is multiple times a day. That's a lot of time. So you add 10 to 15 minutes each time it does that. That's not nothing, but it will function. It's a good news for people, particularly for bikers, I think, because getting out of West Seattle any other way, as we talked about before, is pretty challenging about that bridge. But then the fix on the cylinder, I don't know how long that'll take. It sounds like it's complicated. They had to ship it off somewhere, and then they'll have to reinstall it. So that could be months. But months of slight delays is a vast improvement over months of total closure.
And just a quick one on this. It sounds like these other cylinders that are in here, a 33-year-old structure, if I have that right, these other cylinders might need a little bit of work too. I mean, there's some other maintenance work that needs to go on here, clearly. I'd be worried that another one of these cylinders might go out. Is that part of the equation here too?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, they had planned, so there was planned work for this bridge already. That they were going to have some closures to go in and kind of refurbish these cylinders, and I imagine some other things along the way. So that was no surprise. And in fact, they were monitoring this bridge pretty closely. They haven't said exactly, but the implication, their sort of early implication is that the snow and ice caused some accelerated damage to this one cylinder. So
Mhm.
assuming we don't have another ice storm, then maybe they can kind of proceed as they had originally intended to kind of
Okay.
fix these things up. But the bridges in Seattle, as we've talked about and has been discussed a lot, are all need a lot of work, and
Yeah.
there's not a ton of money to do it. So
Yeah.
you never know with Seattle bridges.
That's what we got. That's what we got. All right. Well, David, time to wrap up here and time for our annual review of the promotional giveaways lineup for the Mariners for this year. Are you in for the Cal Raleigh, the Clinch bobblehead? That one sounds kind of cool. Or is it the Eugenio Suarez Gino Vibes talking bottle opener? We got a lot of great choices this season. I thought I'd throw those two out there to start.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have any. Having grown up going to Mariners games, amazingly, I don't have a single Mariners bobblehead. So
Okay.
maybe any
But-
this year will be good.
But you got to get a talking bottle opener. I mean,
know.
it
And
makes you forget all about the Marco Lorian bobblehead from last year on the Star Wars night for Marcos Gonzalez. I still don't know how that one happened.
Mark, I didn't know about. Okay, I was
Yeah,
wondering.
yeah. Yeah, it's all about the Marco Lorian. I don't know. Sometimes it'll work. Hey, if they get to the playoffs again, they can put out whatever bobbleheads they want.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't care. Well, David, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody out there listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you might like to listen. Please do find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and show your support. We need you. Thanks for watching on Converge Media, too. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.